Hey there, and welcome to our channel. Here we dive into powerful stories of women who rise above betrayal, heartbreak, and life's toughest challenges. Every story will move you, inspire you, and remind you of your own strength. So before we begin, hit that subscribe button, join our growing family, comment below where you watching from, and let's step into today's story together.
It said love would last forever until money whispered in his ear. The words echoed in my mind like a warning I should have seen coming. But I never imagined it would hit me tonight, in the quiet hum of my apartment under the cold glow of my desk lamp. In the next few minutes, my entire life would fracture. And yet I didn't know it yet. I only felt the first tremor. I was hunched over my sketches, pencil tracing a delicate line, imagining the light filtering through the windows of the buildings I designed. My phone buzzed on the desk beside me. A message from a mutual friend, the kind of casual alert you never expect to carry a bomb. I picked it up without thinking. The screen illuminated my face, pale and tense in the muted light. Look at these. He's with her. I scrolled, and then I saw him. My world. My partner. My life's plan folded into one person. There he was, smiling at someone else. Someone taller, polished, radiating wealth and ease that I could never match. The kind of woman who could offer him the life I had imagined with him, only bigger, brighter, richer. My chest tightened, disbelief clawing upward. My heart sank, then broke quietly, like a vase shattering on stone. My hand shook as I set the phone down. The trembling made my wine glass topple. Red liquid spilled across my sketches, staining plans I had spent weeks perfecting. I froze, staring at the shards reflecting the dim light. Broken glass. Broken trust. My reflection split into fragments, my eyes wide, mouth parted, heart hammering in a rhythm I could barely control. Humiliation washed over me first. I had carried our dreams, built our evenings, balanced every expectation he never noticed. And this casual betrayal mocked every hour, every sacrifice. My body went cold as disbelief settled over me. Was this real? Had I been blind for months, years? I picked up the phone again, desperate, as if seeing it twice would undo the damage. The images, the messages, the casual captions, they confirmed it. There was no misunderstanding. He had moved on, chosen someone else, not for love, but for convenience, for a life he deemed better. And me? I was obsolete. I was invisible. The rain outside tapped against the windows in slow rhythmic pulses, each drop a reminder of how wet and fragile my world had become. I traced the largest shard of broken glass with my fingertip. Studying the reflection, my own face stared back at me. Shocked, raw, but beneath the shock, something else stirred. Quiet rage. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, curling at the edges of my disbelief. The rage whispered that I wouldn't just crumble, that humiliation, no matter how sharp, could become a spark, that betrayal, no matter how deep, could be the first note in a symphony of reclamation. My life had been stolen from me tonight, yes, but the ember beneath my chest, it was mine to control. I sank back in my chair, eyes flicking to my sketches, now stained with wine. Each building I had drawn, each line, each corner, it was still mine. No matter what he thought or did, I still had me. I had ideas, vision, strength. And suddenly, for the first time tonight, I understood something crucial. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the opening chapter of the one I would write myself. The phone vibrated again, but I didn't pick it up. I let it rest on the desk, like the weight of betrayal itself. I closed my eyes, letting the cold, muted room settle around me. Broken glass, shattered plans, a glowing screen, all symbols of what had been taken. And beneath it all, the quiet determination that I wasn't finished. I whispered to the reflection in the shards. He thought leaving me for wealth would break me. He had no idea it was the spark I needed. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, a storm had begun, one that no one could see, but that would shape everything to come. And in that moment, I made a silent vow. This story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I thought I could handle tonight, that I could walk into the gala, smile politely, and pretend nothing had shifted. But as I stepped under the chandelier's glittering light, I realized just how wrong I was. The room buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, a river of polished faces and familiar names. And then I saw him. My ex. My former world. The man who had promised forever. Now laughing beside her. Her, the richer girl he had chosen over me. Every glance they shared cut deeper than any knife. I forced a smile, greeting a few friends with a carefully measured warmth, but whispers followed me like shadows. Did you hear about him leaving her? She looks crushed, didn't she? The words hung in the air, slicing through my chest. I moved to the mirrored wall at the far end of the hall. I caught my reflection, polished, poised, but in the mirror next to me, the space where he should have been was empty. Her presence filled it. My absence was glaring, obvious. The emptiness beside me mirrored the humiliation I couldn't speak aloud. I felt the heat rise in my chest. Anger bubbled quietly under the surface, a simmering force I had learned to contain. Nobody saw it yet. Nobody would until I decided they could. He caught my gaze across the room, smiled, and turned back to her. My stomach twisted, but I straightened my shoulders. I would not let this night break me. A friend approached, offering a hand and a tentative smile. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, masking the tremor in my hands. I laughed softly, the sound hollow even to my own ears. The world expected me to crumble. I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction. I drifted closer to the bar, lifting a glass of champagne, and studied the crowd. They saw my exterior, confident, composed, but inside my mind raced. Every whisper, every glance, every subtle laugh at my expense became data, a map of social terrain I could use to my advantage. The new girl leaned into him, laughing at a joke he told, her arm brushing his. I caught the movement out of the corner of my eye and felt a spike of rage. Not blind rage, the controlled, precise kind that sharpens the mind. I imagined every slight, every social jab, every stolen glance as a puzzle piece I would rearrange to my advantage. I smiled, inwardly counting seconds, thinking, they think this night defines me. They have no idea it's the night my plans begin. I excused myself near a quiet corner, letting the glittering crowd blur behind me. My reflection in the mirrored wall stared back at me. Not just a woman scorned, but someone cataloging every detail, every conversation, every subtle mockery. She's laughing, yes, but the night wasn't over. I adjusted my dress, breathed deeply, and whispered under my breath. I see everything, and soon, everything will see me. The clock ticked somewhere behind the walls, the sound lost beneath the music and chatter. But I felt it in my chest, the steady pulse of strategy, of quiet vengeance. I wasn't broken. I was awake. And the next move, it would be mine. As I lifted my glass again, eyes catching his across the hall, I thought softly, enjoy the night while it lasts. Tomorrow, the story changes, and it changes on my terms. I closed the apartment door behind me and leaned against it, letting the lock click echo like a punctuation mark on the night. Outside, the rain drummed relentlessly against the window pane, a steady rhythm that matched the thundering pulse in my chest. I didn't want to move, didn't want to breathe too loudly. I just let the cold apartment envelop me, a mirror to the emptiness I felt inside. The city lights reflected on the wet glass, fractured into jagged lines that danced across the floor. I caught my reflection in the tall mirror across the room, but it wasn't whole. The face staring back at me was familiar yet distant. Shadows under my eyes, a tightness in my jaw, the tremor I fought to hide all night. My reflection splintered across the cracked surface, 1,000 shards of trust broken, of love betrayed, of certainty lost. I whispered to the fractured reflection, "You thought leaving me would destroy me. You thought wealth and status could erase what we had. You were wrong." I sank to the floor, legs tucked under me, staring at the rain-slicked streets below. Memories replayed like a cruel slideshow. His laughter when I trusted him, the way he used my dreams as a punchline at dinner parties, the smile he now reserved for her, the richer girl, the one who had everything he thought he wanted. And yet, in the same heartbeat, I saw the spark within myself, a tiny flicker, almost buried, that refused to be extinguished. I picked up the cracked frame on the table, the photo of us together before everything fell apart. My fingers traced the edge of the glass, careful not to cut myself, careful not to let the memories draw blood I couldn't handle. I pressed my forehead against it and let the weight of grief settle like stones in my chest. Every betrayal has a language. Tonight, I learned it. In whispers, in glances, in the absence of care. And yet, within that language, I heard another voice, the one I'd almost forgotten, my own. I muttered to myself, pain isn't the end. It's the beginning of the map I draw for myself, and every step, every line, every choice will be mine. I rose slowly, moving toward the window. Raindrops raced each other down the glass, each streak a mirror of the racing thoughts in my mind. I traced the lines of the streets below with my eyes, plotting paths not out of revenge yet, but towards self-reclamation. Each thought, each pulse of my heart began to pulse in time with a single word: focus. I opened my laptop and sat cross-legged on the floor. Emails, contacts, unfinished plans, all the small pieces of a life I had paused while he lived out his choices, flickered on the screen. Each one now became data. Each one became leverage over myself, over my own future. I wasn't ready for him yet, but I was ready for me. I murmured softly, "This is the quiet before everything changes. The night before my own world starts to move." Memories of him hovered in the corners of my mind. The way he laughed, the way he dismissed me, the way he flaunted her presence without a thought. Pain had been my first companion, but I felt it morph into clarity. The same rage that had tightened my chest into a fist was transforming into a tool. Not destructive, not loud, strategic, focused. I walked to the bedroom and picked up my sketchpad, the pages still smelling faintly of ink and dreams. I flipped through them, each page a frozen idea, a potential waiting for breath. Ideas I had abandoned, projects I had set aside to maintain a life that wasn't fully mine. Tonight, that ends. Tonight, I reclaim not just my heart, but the work, the mind, the ambition that he tried to belittle. I pressed a hand against the glass, watching raindrops race down like tiny waterfalls, and whispered, "He chose riches over love. But I'll choose everything else. Freedom, strength, vision, and no one will take it from me." I sank onto the floor again, back to the shadows, and made the first mark on my journal. One word at the top of the page: plan. Below it, small notes, steps, timelines. Nothing chaotic, nothing emotional, just structure, order, and the smallest spark of anticipation. Holding the pen, I thought about him, about the life he thought he could buy with money and charm, a life I could no longer enter, and yet paradoxically, the life I needed to rise above him. Not by destruction, not by exposure yet, but by becoming someone untouchable, someone he could never influence again. I pressed the final line of ink into the page and looked at the empty shadows where the ring had fallen. I whispered to the night, "He left me for wealth. He left me thinking I'd crumble. But this is the first night of the life he'll never see coming. Mine." I pushed the door open to the little cafe on the corner, letting the warmth and the faint scent of roasted beans wash over me. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and gleaming, reflecting the amber glow of streetlights and shop windows. I chose a table by the window, the same one I had sat at months ago, dreaming about a life that had now dissolved into betrayal. I wrapped my hands around the ceramic cup, letting the steam curl into my face like a reminder that some things, like warmth, like small comforts, still existed. I let myself sink into the grief I had tucked away for nights spent staring at darkened ceilings, letting memories of him flicker like an old film. The whispered promises, the laughter, the touch that once felt like home, they all came rushing back, uninvited but unavoidable. And yet, there was clarity beneath it. In the quiet hum of the cafe, between the soft clatter of cups and the low murmur of conversation, I realized that vulnerability could be a weapon, not in the way he had wielded his charm, but in the way truth could anchor you. I allowed myself to feel it fully, the sting of loss, the hollow ache, but I didn't let it consume me. Instead, I folded it, measured it, and began to see the patterns beneath the chaos. I traced the rim of my cup with my finger and murmured, "Pain isn't a prison, it's a map, and I'm learning to read it." I pulled out my notebook and pen, the pages still crisp, ready for the kind of thinking that only solitude could bring. I started jotting down names, dates, conversations, anything that had felt disjointed in the past. Slowly, patterns emerged, moments where he had lied, misrepresented, or subtly manipulated. At first, it felt like digging through old wounds, but soon it felt like uncovering a secret blueprint of behavior, a template that could no longer hold sway over me. Sunlight began to filter through the cafe windows, golden and warming. The rain had cleared the streets, leaving the city alive with reflections and glints of possibility. And in that glow, I felt the first spark of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Focus. Not distraction, not escape. Real, concentrated focus, the kind that turns grief into insight. I whispered to myself, he thought leaving me would scatter me, but I'm gathering pieces. Shards of memory, clues, lessons, and I'm building something he'll never anticipate. A barista passed by, offering a polite smile, and for the first time since that night of betrayal, I returned it. It wasn't joy, it wasn't relief, it was recognition. The beginning of acceptance, the recognition that grief doesn't weaken, it clarifies. And as I traced the rain-streaked window with my finger, I understood that the life I had imagined, the life he abandoned, could still exist, but it would exist on my terms, constructed from understanding, evidence, and relentless focus. I closed the notebook and leaned back, letting the warm amber light wash over my face. I whispered, he left me for wealth. I lost him, yes, but in this loss, I've found the blueprint for everything I'm about to become. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The city was still draped in fog, quiet except for the faint hum of traffic in the distance. My desk was cluttered, coffee stands, cups, open notebooks, and my laptop screen glowing dimly in the half-light. It didn't look like chaos to me. It looks like the beginning of something precise. The first thing I did was open my messages, not to scroll through memories, but to trace timelines. Every conversation had a pattern, and I was beginning to see it now. His absences lined up perfectly with certain business trips. The same names reappeared across different days, disguised as harmless colleagues. And when I compared timestamps, one thing became painfully clear. I hadn't been blind. I had been conditioned not to look. I leaned back, letting that truth settle. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was systematic. He'd built a framework around me, one where I was kept busy with affection, reassurance, and half-truths, while he rerouted loyalty elsewhere. I murmured to myself, it wasn't love, it was design, and now I'm learning his architecture. I began mapping it out physically. Sheets of paper spread across the floor, lines drawn between dates and decisions. The more I wrote, the more connections emerged. Every time I believed I had a choice, he'd already paved the road toward his advantage. The dinners he canceled, the meetings that ran late, the subtle way he'd made me doubt my instincts, it was all there in data and ink. The rage I had buried under composure began to resurface, but this time it wasn't wild or chaotic. It was sharpened, deliberate. There was power in knowing how the strings were pulled, because once you saw the strings, you could start cutting them. I turned to my laptop, opening bank records, shared files, social media. I noticed he'd moved certain transactions just before he left, transferring funds, closing accounts, and yet his new partner had posted something that gave away more than she intended, an image of the same car he had once told me he couldn't afford. Her caption read, "When dreams align with the right person." That was the moment I realized something deeper. His betrayal wasn't random. It was transactional. Every choice, every move, every charm had been an investment toward a better financial future for him, and I had been his stepping stone. I whispered into the stillness, he didn't just replace me, he leveraged me, and I'm about to reclaim every inch he stood on. My apartment became an evidence lab. The walls filled with sticky notes, color-coded by motive, red for lies, blue for manipulation, yellow for my moments of clarity. Patterns emerged like constellations on plaster. What used to look like chaos now had structure, and the beauty of structure was that it could be rebuilt, stronger, cleaner, on my terms. I spent hours in that room tracing lines, drawing arrows, cataloging truths. It wasn't revenge I was plotting, not yet. It was understanding. True control, I was learning, doesn't come from striking back. It comes from seeing everything for what it is and knowing how to move in silence while others are blind. There was a shift in me, subtle but irreversible. The grief that had once sat in my chest like a stone began to melt, turning into resolve. For the first time since that night of broken glass, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like an observer, a strategist, someone quietly taking back command of her own narrative. Outside, sunlight began to pierce through the fog, spilling across the floor and illuminating the mess I had made. The notes, the lines, the fragments of my old life dissected into patterns. And in that soft light, everything felt clearer. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. about who I could become when no one was defining my worth but me. I smiled faintly and whispered, "He taught me how to lose everything. I'm teaching myself how to build from nothing." As the clock ticked on, I gathered the papers into a binder, my first piece of proof that knowledge was power. Not just data, but transformation, written in ink and willpower. I pinned one final note at the center of the wall. Truth is leverage. The line shimmered slightly in the morning light, and I felt something click into place. Every betrayal, every lie, every humiliation had become material, raw material, and I was molding it into something far stronger than revenge: identity. I stood back watching the morning light spill across the words and whispered, "He thought I was the chapter he closed, but I'm the lesson he'll never stop learning from." The morning after I finished mapping out the betrayal, I found myself back in the studio I hadn't stepped into in months. Dust had settled on the drafting table, sketches half done still pinned to the board, coffee stains marking the ghosts of long nights. The smell of graphite and paper lingered. It used to be comforting, but now it felt foreign, like returning to a language I'd forgotten how to speak. That's when I heard his voice, calm, familiar, grounding. "Still afraid of your own brilliance, Maya?" I turned, startled. It was Rajiv, my old mentor, the one who taught me how to see structure in chaos, how to build meaning from fragments. He'd always seen more in me than I ever allowed myself to believe. I tried to smile, deflecting. "You shouldn't sneak up on people like that." He raised an eyebrow. "You stopped answering my calls. I figured I'd stop waiting for permission." I gestured to the mess around me. "There's not much to see, just broken drafts of what used to be my life." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the table, brushing his fingers over the unfinished blueprints. "You know," he said softly, "the strongest structures aren't the ones that never break. They're the ones that are rebuilt with intention, with better foundations." His words lingered, too close to the truth I'd been avoiding. I looked at him and whispered, "He built his foundation on lies. Maybe it's time I build mine on something unshakable." Rajiv smiled faintly. "There she is," he said, "the architect who used to dream in skylines, the woman who knew every failure could become part of the design." I sat down at the table, tracing the edge of one old sketch, a curved roofline I'd abandoned months ago when life became a blur of compromise. I used to think creation required love. Now I think it just requires clarity. He nodded, taking a seat across from me. "You've always had clarity, Maya. You just let someone else fog the glass." Those words pierced deeper than I expected. I thought of all the times I dimmed myself to fit into someone else's idea of balance, all the moments I'd deferred my own projects to accommodate his ambition. And now, the silence that followed his betrayal wasn't emptiness. It was space. Room to create. Rajiv leaned forward. "You think your story ended when he left. But what if that was the moment your real story began?" I looked at the sunlight filtering through the blinds, the slats painting golden lines across the blueprints like the beginnings of a horizon. "It doesn't feel like a beginning," I said. "Beginnings never do. They feel like endings until you decide otherwise." I exhaled, letting the weight of those words settle. Maybe he was right. Maybe grief wasn't meant to cage me. Maybe it was meant to strip me bare so I could rebuild with precision. I murmured to myself, "He tried to erase me. But all he did was give me a blank page."
Something's shifted then. Quiet but undeniable. I pulled one of my old projects from the drawer, Haven Concepts, the sustainable architecture initiative I'd once dreamed of building. It had been shelved the moment he convinced me to join his firm instead. To be practical, he'd said, to start small. Rajiv caught the flicker in my eyes as I spread the papers across the table. "There," he said, "that's what I came for, that spark. Don't waste it." I looked at the designs, the balance of structure and light, the harmony I'd once envisioned between human space and nature. It felt distant and familiar all at once, like rediscovering an old photograph of who I used to be. I took a deep breath. "Do you think I can still build this?" He smiled, the kind of knowing smile only a mentor can give. "You already did. You just forgot to sign your name." I laughed softly, the first real laugh in weeks. It felt strange, almost guilty, but also freeing. That moment of levity cracked something open inside me, a release from the heaviness that had clung to me since the night of the betrayal. The light through the blinds shifted again, falling directly over the words Haven Concepts in bold ink. I whispered to myself, "He took my peace. I'll take my purpose." For the rest of the afternoon, Rajiv stayed, not talking much, just present as I redrew lines, erased old ones, and let my hand remember what focus felt like. Every pencil stroke was an act of reclamation. Every line I drew pulled me further away from what he'd taken and closer to what I was becoming. When Rajiv finally stood to leave, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "One more thing," he said. "Don't build for revenge, Maya. Build for legacy. Revenge burns fast. Legacy endures." I nodded, my gaze fixed on the glowing sketches. "Legacy," I repeated softly. "Something that outlives the pain." The room was quiet again after he left, filled only with the sound of my pen scratching across the page. The air felt lighter, alive. As sunlight faded into amber, I looked at the sketches and whispered, "He built his future on deceit. I'll build mine on truth. And when the world sees what I create, he'll realize he never left me behind. He just gave me a head start." The next morning, I woke to silence. No messages, no expectations, no noise trying to define who I should be. Just the sound of rain drying on the window and the faint hum of a city already moving on. For the first time in a long time, that silence didn't scare me. It steadied me. I made coffee, sat at the table, and unrolled the blueprint from the night before. The lines from Haven Concepts stretched across the paper like veins, fragile, intricate, alive. This wasn't just a design anymore. It was my declaration. I remembered Rajiv's words, "Don't build for revenge. Build for legacy." Legacy. The word lingered in the air, powerful and grounding. I opened my notebook and began writing a list not of regrets, but of reconstruction. 1. Close old accounts. 2. Open my own. 3. Find my first client. 4. Never look back. The simplicity of it calmed me. For months, I'd been defined by reaction. Now, I was defining by intention. I whispered to myself, grief didn't break me. It mapped the way to my next move. I spent the day putting my words into motion. At the bank, I opened an account under my name alone. No shared funds, no joint signatures. The clerk smiled as she handed me the new debit card, not knowing the weight of what that small piece of plastic meant. Freedom, finally tangible. When I walked out of the building, the air felt different. The sky was clearing, blue and gold after the rain, as if the world was quietly acknowledging my first step forward. Back in my apartment, I cleared the cluttered workspace, the wine-stained papers, the fragments of the past, and replaced them with fresh pages, clean, ready, a blank table for a new foundation. Every decision from that point had purpose. I called old contacts, reconnected with people who remembered me before him. The conversations were cautious at first, but soon words flowed easily. I wasn't asking for validation anymore. I was offering vision. That night, under the dim light of my desk lamp, I began sketching again, not the old dreams, but new ones. The lines came effortlessly, the way breathing feels when you've stopped trying too hard. My hands moved with certainty, tracing outlines of structures not yet built, both on paper and in spirit. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was reclamation. As I traced the pen along a new arc in the drawing, I thought, he mistook my silence for surrender. He forgot silence is where storms begin. Days began to blur into nights, each one marked with progress. I refined my designs, rebranded my name, and started drafting proposals for small sustainable projects, community spaces, affordable housing, things that reflected who I'd always wanted to be. Each sketch was more than a drawing. It was a step towards something bigger, a world in which my voice couldn't be muted or borrowed. I sent the first proposal to a local development firm I'd once interned at years ago. When I hit send, my heart pounded, not from fear, but from possibility. I realized then that success wasn't the opposite of failure. It was the quiet decision to keep moving even when no one was watching. Later that evening, I rolled out a larger blueprint, my ultimate plan, Haven Concepts, my vision for sustainable, human-centered design that merged emotion with structure. It was ambitious, maybe even reckless, but it was mine. As I pinned it to the wall, I caught my reflection in the window, faint, blurred by city lights. I didn't look like the woman who'd been betrayed. I looked like someone in motion, Someone in control. I smiled faintly and whispered, "He built his future on deceit. I'll build mine on truth, and when the world sees what I create, they'll know the difference." The hours stretched on, filled with the rhythmic sound of pencil against paper. It was late when I finally leaned back, fingers stained with graphite, eyes fixed on the plans before me. Every line, every note, every number meant something. A wall wasn't just a structure, it was a boundary. A window wasn't just for light, it was perspective. And a foundation was the proof that you could start again, and this time build something that couldn't be taken. I closed my sketchbook, tracing the embossed initials on the cover. M.K. My name, unshared, unborrowed, fully my own. There was a peace in that moment. Not the fragile peace of pretending everything was fine, but the steady, defiant peace of knowing you're finally becoming who you were meant to be. As I rolled up the blueprint, I whispered softly, "He built his empire on illusion. I'll build my legacy on truth. And when the world sees what I create, they'll know the difference."
The city glowed in restless colors that night, gold, silver, and the faint pulse of red from passing cars. Every light felt alive, deliberate, almost conspiratorial. I stood at the window of my new apartment, the lease papers still warm from my signature. A clean slate. No ghosts in the walls. It wasn't just a move. It was a declaration. Quiet, strategic, unstoppable. I placed the signed lease on the desk beside my laptop and a fresh folder labeled Haven Concepts Ltd. The name looked professional, calm, but I knew what it truly was. The first move on a board my ex didn't even know existed. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, a low, rhythmic reminder that every second now belonged to me. No more waiting for his approval, no more being a shadow orbiting someone else's sun. I worked through the night, sketching, researching, drafting proposals, calculating budgets. The desk lamp glowed amber against the white of the paper, a beacon cutting through the midnight haze. Every plan, every note had intent. I wasn't chasing his world anymore. I was building my own. As the clock struck 1, I whispered, "He thought I was done, but he never learned. Architects build from ruins." By morning, I had a list of calls to make. Not emotional ones, professional. I reached out to old professors, mentors, colleagues who once admired my precision, but never saw me claim it. This time, they heard a different tone in my voice. Confidence, vision, certainty. Within a week, I'd secured a shared office in the design district. It was small, cracked plaster, humming fluorescent lights, but it had a wide window overlooking the city. My first blueprint pinned to the wall looked right at home there, like it had been waiting for that exact spot. The early days were a blur of caffeine, late nights, and silent victories. The first proposal accepted, the first client payment, the first recognition. Quiet, but intoxicating. And in between it all, the faint tremor of danger, the knowledge that he might see it, might recognize the name, might realize what I was building. I caught myself smiling once, whispering, "If he does see it, I hope he looks closely. Every line I draw is a reminder of what he tried to erase." There was something poetic in it. His money, his new world, built on inheritance and illusion, mine on skill and silence. We were both architects now, but of different legacies. At night, when the city went quiet, I'd light a single candle beside my blueprints. Its flame flickered against the walls, reflecting in the glass like a pulse. A reminder that time was moving, and so was I. Still, with every gain came tension. Success invited attention, and attention was dangerous. One afternoon, I received a call from a number I hadn't saved, but knew too well. His voice, smooth, familiar, distant. "I heard you're doing well?" he said cautiously. I smiled, unseen. "You shouldn't believe everything you hear." He laughed, that condescending laugh he once used when I challenged him. "Careful, love. Ambition burns fast." "I don't burn. I build," replied softly. The line went silent. When he hung up, I realized he hadn't called to check in. He'd called because he'd heard. He'd felt the tremor of my name moving through the circles he thought he controlled. That night, I locked my plans away, every file password protected, every design encrypted. The city lights outside flickered like Morse code, as if whispering that the clock was still ticking and the game had truly begun. I sat back in my chair, breathing slow, and whispered, "He's watching now." Good, let him. A storm's worth nothing if no one sees it coming. Weeks passed. The first public announcement came, a small magazine feature highlighting new architects redefining urban living. My name printed in sleek black ink under the headline, "Rising Voices in Design." I read it 3 times, not out of pride, but disbelief, the kind that humbles you before it empowers you, because that was the moment I knew. The revenge wasn't in hurting him, it was in being seen. I stared at the printed article for a long time, my name glowing faintly under the desk lamp. He had left me for wealth. He had chosen easy luxury over loyalty. But I had found something he couldn't touch. Purpose. I leaned back, eyes fixed on the ticking clock, and whispered, "Every empire falls when it underestimates the architect who designed its foundations. His time is ticking, and I'm the one keeping score." The morning after the article went live, I woke to sunlight instead of shadows. It streamed through the blinds, warm and deliberate, landing across my desk where last night's blueprints still lay open like secrets waiting to be found. My phone buzzed. Notifications, mentions, emails, words I'd once waited years to hear. "Impressive work. Your concept is refreshing. We'd love to collaborate." I stared at the screen for a long time. Not smiling yet, not celebrating. The clock on the wall ticked softly, the same one that had marked every hour of my rebuilding. It wasn't applause I was after. It was acknowledgement. Silent, earned, and unshakable. I poured coffee, watching the steam rise and blurred the reflection of my face in the window. I murmured, "He left me invisible. Now the world is starting to notice the silhouette he erased." By mid-morning, I was sitting in my favorite cafe, the same one where I'd once drowned in grief. The seat by the window still creaked the same way, but everything else had changed. My posture, my presence, the world's response to my name. The newspaper lay open on the counter beside me, a blurred headline catching the light. I folded the edge carefully, my fingers trembling slightly. The barista noticed and smiled. "You're in the paper, right?" I nodded once softly. "So they tell me." He grinned. "You must be proud." Proud. The word sat strange on my tongue. I didn't feel proud. I felt validated. Like all the silence, the humiliation, the loneliness had finally formed something tangible, something that couldn't be taken back. Across the cafe, a voice I hadn't heard in weeks cut through the air. Smooth, familiar, calculated. I didn't turn first. I didn't need to. "Still drinking that same caramel blend?" he said, stepping closer. "I see some things never change." I looked up slowly, meeting his eyes, calm, measured, unreadable. He looked polished, expensive, like the world still bent for him, but his gaze flickered for just a second when he saw the paper beside me. "Oh," he said, his smile tightening. "So, that's you. Haven Concepts, huh? Clever name." I let the silence stretch, the kind that makes the confident stumble. Then I smiled, not warmly, not cruelly, just enough. "I suppose some of us create what others simply inherit." His jaw twitched. "You've been busy." "Always was. You just never looked closely enough." He laughed then, soft, nervous. "You know, I didn't expect you'd survive," I finished for him. He hesitated. "Thrive." There it was, the word he didn't want to say, the acknowledgement he never thought I'd earn. He left before finishing his coffee, offering one last smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. I waited until he walked out, then exhaled slowly, feeling the air around me shift, like a storm changing direction. He thought he was still the main story, I whispered, watching his reflection fade in the window. But I've already turned the page. Later that week, a client dinner became the next quiet milestone. Dim lights, wine glasses clinking, people using my name like it belonged among theirs. One of them leaned forward. "So, tell us, what drives your design philosophy?" I smiled. "Restoration. Turning what's broken into what's beautiful." They nodded, intrigued, unaware how personal that line truly was. The conversation moved on, but I caught sight of another reflection, a familiar profile across the restaurant. He was there, again, sitting with her, the richer girl, the one he left me for. They looked perfect, on the surface. She laughed too loudly, he smiled too tightly. And for the first time, I didn't feel pain. I felt distance. I felt perspective. They're still playing the part, I thought, sipping my wine. I stopped auditioning for it a long time ago. When I returned home, the city lights blinked like signals, some red, some gold, all alive. I hung my coat, placed my keys on the table, and glanced again at the article pinned on my corkboard. But something else caught my eye. A message on my phone from an unknown number. "You've changed. Impressive. Let's talk." No name, just implication. I stared at it for a moment, then deleted it without hesitation. I'd learned something vital. Power doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs to exist. Quietly, steadily, and undeniably. The next morning, I poured coffee into my chipped mug, the same one I refused to replace. Its cracks were visible, but it still held warmth. So did I. And in that simplicity, I understood what real control felt like. Not revenge, not validation, but peace in progress. I looked at the city skyline and whispered, he thought success would make me chase him, but all it did was make me see he's the one who's been running ever since he left. The room was dim, except for the glow of the desk lamp. Papers were everywhere, blueprints, proposals, notes marked in my looping handwriting. The hum of the city outside was distant, but my pulse filled the silence. Everything I had built, every plan, every step was coming together. Until his name appeared on my phone. At first I thought it was a mistake. Then the message came. Heard you're presenting at the development board tomorrow. Guess we'll be in the same room again. The air thickened. My pitch, my confidential pitch, was the foundation of the entire project. If he saw the plans before the unveiling, he'd realize the concept had roots in his own mistakes. And if he figured that out too soon, everything I had built could collapse before it began. I turned off the phone and leaned over the desk, tracing the edge of the blueprint with trembling fingers. The lines I had drawn were clean, measured, everything his life wasn't. He was walking into a meeting, but I was walking into a war he didn't even know had started. The next morning
Came too fast. The boardroom buzzed with conversation, polished shoes clicked on marble. He entered, all charm and ease, hand on her shoulder, the same hollow performance. He didn't see me at first. I stood near the far wall, binder pressed to my chest, breathing in calm precision. When his gaze finally found me, his smile faltered, just for a second. The chair beside him asked, "So, who's leading today's concept pitch?" Before he could speak, I stepped forward. "I am." Silence. The projector came to life. My designs filled the screen, flowing structures of glass and steel, spaces that represented rebirth, independence, resilience. Words that once defined me privately now stood as the core of my vision. As I spoke, I noticed his expression shift, recognition dawning. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "This model," he said suddenly, voice tight, "it looks familiar." My heart raced, but I smiled evenly. "It should," I replied. "It's based on the idea of rebuilding after collapse, of learning from structures that failed under their own weight." The room went still, his face drained in color. As the applause began to ripple through the room, I whispered in my mind, he tried to expose me, but all he did was prove how blind he'd been to the foundation beneath his own downfall. That night, I worked long after the city had gone quiet. The meeting had gone perfectly, on paper, but I could still feel his stare across the boardroom table, that flicker of realization that I was no longer part of his story, but the author of my own. The candle on my desk burned low, its flame soft and unbothered. I stared at the latest design, a curved structure shaped like rising wings. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. I set the pen down and leaned back, breathing in the silence. The clock ticked softly in rhythm with my pulse. For months, I'd built in shadows, I thought. But maybe true power isn't in secrecy. It's in standing so firmly in your light that no one can dim it again. I reached for the ring box I'd kept hidden in the drawer, the one I hadn't opened since he left. Inside was the broken ring, still glinting faintly. I smiled, not bitterly, but gently, and placed it beside the candle. The flame caught on its edge, making it gleam one last time before I closed the lid. Then I rolled the new blueprint open. My next project, bigger, freer, untouched by the past. Every curve, every line felt like exhale, like release. I whispered, "I used to draw to impress him. Now I draw to remember who I am." The candle flickered, the shadows dancing across the paper like waves of light. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I had already become everything I once doubted I could be. The skyline outside glimmered with quiet approval.
I pressed my hand over the fresh lines of ink and whispered, "Every blueprint, every hidden step, was a countdown to the life he never saw coming." They once whispered that I was a shadow in his story. Tonight, they'll see who was really carrying the light. The sound of applause echoed before I even reached the stage. The grand hall shimmered. Gold edges, glass surfaces, the hum of success layered over the murmur of envy. My heels clicked against the marble like a metronome counting down the end of an era. This was it. The unveiling of Havenrise, my first major architectural project under my own name. Not his firm's, not his influence, mine. The air carried 1,000 eyes, 1,000 judgments. I felt their weight, but it didn't suffocate me this time. It lifted me. The same people who had once pitied me now leaned forward, waiting to hear what I would say. I took the stage. The lights were blinding, but I didn't flinch. For the first time, I felt the spotlight not as exposure, but as belonging. I smiled, calm, steady, as the host announced, "Tonight we honor a new voice redefining sustainable architecture, Maya Khanna, founder of Haven Concepts." My name, not his. The last time I stood under this kind of light, I was standing next to him, fading in his shadow. Tonight, that shadow doesn't exist. The applause grew louder, more sincere this time. I looked out into the sea of faces, and then I saw him. Ethan. He was standing near the back, drink in hand, jaw tight, eyes locked on me. He looked smaller somehow, not in stature, but in spirit, as if the stage itself had tilted and he was finally the one looking up. The irony wasn't lost on me. I began to speak, my voice steady. When I first drew this project, I was thinking about what it means to rebuild, not just structures, but people. Sometimes what breaks us is not failure. It's believing the wrong person was holding the blueprint to our future. A murmur rippled through the audience. They understood. Ethan's gaze flickered, just for a second. I caught it, held it, then moved past it, because this moment wasn't about him anymore. The screens behind me displayed the visuals, sweeping green terraces, transparent walls, the fusion of glass and growth. Every element carried meaning, transparency, rebirth, freedom. I stepped forward slightly, letting the lights catch my face. The cameras clicked in rhythm. My heart felt still, unshakable. I stepped forward slightly, letting the lights catch my face. The cameras clicked in rhythm. My heart felt still, unshakable. When I started again, I said softly, I promised myself I'd never design for applause, only for truth. And if you can build from truth, nothing can destroy it. The crowd erupted. Applause thundered like a storm breaking free. People rose to their feet. And still I could feel his stare, cold and distant, somewhere behind the brilliance. As I smiled and took a subtle bow, I whispered to myself, he left me for wealth, but tonight the world sees what real value looks like, and it's standing right here under her own light. She no longer looked like the woman he left. She looked like the consequence of leaving her. The applause still rang in the hall, echoing like a heartbeat too loud to ignore. Ethan stood near the edge of the ballroom, his glass untouched, his throat dry. For the first time, the sound of her name, Maya Khanna, carried a weight he couldn't touch. She stood on stage, radiant under the lights. The glow painted her skin in golds and silvers, a living sculpture carved from resolve. Around her, the crowd buzzed, the city's most powerful, smiling, applauding, admiring. He felt it like a slow, unrelenting truth pressing into his chest. That used to be his light, his circles, his stage. Only now, she was the reason people were here, and he was the uninvited shadow standing in the back. Maya smiled as the host handed her the award. She didn't search for him, didn't even glance his way. And that was worse than anger. It was erasure. He used to believe she couldn't move without him, that her ambition was an accessory, not a drive. But watching her now, confident, graceful, unshaken, he realized how much smaller his world had become without her in it. He thought wealth had given him power. But power had always been her quiet strength, the way she listened, planned, built. He only understood it now that he stood on the outside looking in. The lights dimmed slightly as the audience began to mingle again. Ethan stepped back, his reflection caught in one of the mirrored pillars, fractured, disjointed. He saw her face reflected too, but hers was whole, bright, and moving forward. She wasn't part of his story anymore. She was the story. For a moment, he remembered that night. The rain, the silence, the ring left on the table. He had thought he had won. Now he saw it clearly. That night, she hadn't fallen. She had begun. He swallowed hard, the music swelling behind him. Someone asked him if he was all right, but he nodded vaguely, but his eyes never left her. She laughed with someone near the stage, the same laugh he once loved, the one he thought he owned. Only now, it didn't reach him. It passed over, light as air, unbothered. The spotlight shifted again, landing squarely on her as photographers closed in. His corner remained dim, untouched by attention. The reversal was complete. From the darkness where he stood, Ethan exhaled shakily, realizing what loss truly meant. And as Maya turned toward another handshake, radiant beneath the golden light, she whispered under her breath, "Not to him, but to the universe that finally saw her. He thought I'd disappear in his absence, but I only learned how to shine without permission." The world finally saw what I'd always known. Success speaks louder when it's born from silence. The morning after the gala, the city hummed differently. Not louder, clearer. Maya stirred her coffee slowly, watching the steam rise like a quiet celebration. Her phone buzzed, screen flashing headline after headline. Architect Maya Khanna redefines urban design at annual city gala. A visionary woman leads where others follow. Notifications blurred into light, but one headline made her pause. His name buried beneath hers. Ethan Wales' firm faces client withdrawals after rival firm's stunning debut. It wasn't planned, not like this. She hadn't built to destroy, she had built to create. But truth had a strange way of surfacing, unprompted. The very investors he once flaunted had started shifting their attention, subtly, steadily, toward her firm. Her ideas were bold, sustainable, honest. The opposite of the shortcuts he once mocked her for. And now, those shortcuts were collapsing beneath him. She scrolled through the comments beneath the articles. Praise, curiosity, respect. Not the kind built on appearance or wealth, but on substance. Every word, every recognition felt like a soft exhale of justice. Not vengeance, balance. Outside her window, the morning light spilled over her drafting table, the same one she'd bought with her first independent paycheck, the same one she'd once cried over. Now it gleamed with sketches of her next project, each line cleaner than the last. She picked up her pen, twirling it between her fingers, thinking of the irony, that while he chased validation through others, she'd built hers in solitude. He had left her for glitter. She had chosen gold, the real kind, the kind forged from grit, not greed. Her assistant knocked softly and sliding in a folder. Another client wants to collaborate. They mentioned last night's speech, said it moved them. Maya smiled and closed the laptop. Then tell them we'll meet next week. I want a time to think. The assistant nodded and left. For a moment, Maya stood by the window, gazing out at the skyline she had helped shape, her designs etched into the horizon like quiet poetry. She didn't gloat. She didn't even think of calling him. Because some victories weren't meant to be announced. They were simply lived. She picked up her coffee again, whispering to the reflection in the glass, "He thought I'd disappear in his absence, but I only learned how to shine without permission." The world finally saw what I'd always known. Success speaks louder when it's born from silence.
After every storm, there comes a morning so still, you almost forget what thunder sounded like. The city was still half asleep when Maya woke. The soft, amber light filtered through her sheer curtains, spilling warmth across the wooden floor. Her plants leaned toward the window, green and alive, reaching for the same sunlight she was finally learning to rest beneath. The skyline, her skyline, shimmered in the distance, not as a monument to victory, but as a mirror to her persistence. On the table beside her, a half-drunk cup of coffee sat next to the framed article from the gala, her photo frozen mid-laugh, eyes alive with purpose. Next to it lay her old sketchbook, the one she hadn't opened in months. She traced a finger along its worn edges, feeling every dent, every crease. Inside were the blueprints of who she once was. Naive, hopeful, breakable. And yet those fragile sketches had been the scaffolding of everything that now stood solid around her. She smiled, faint and serene. Her phone buzzed, a text from a journalist. Feature piece request. From Heartbreak to Skyline, the Maya Kona story. She chuckled, typing back one line. Heartbreak wasn't my story. It was just the foundation. Setting the phone aside, she turned to the balcony. The sun had fully risen now, painting the buildings in gold. The world outside moved on its own rhythm, unaware of how quietly a soul could rebuild itself from ruins. Maya sipped her coffee, feeling its warmth spread through her chest. There was no longer an ache when she thought of him, only distance, like a story she'd once read and outgrown. Some scars don't fade. They just stop hurting. And in that stillness, she understood something profound. Healing isn't about forgetting who hurt you. It's about remembering who you were before they did. She closed her eyes, letting the sunlight kiss her face. I used to chase closure like it was something he owed me. But peace isn't something you're given. It's something you decide to keep. On her desk, among the sketches, sat a single brass plaque engraved with her company's name. Kavya Designs, built from vision. It wasn't just her business. It was her story, etched not in grief, but in growth. The clock ticked gently, not as a reminder of time lost, but time lived. Maya breathed deeply and whispered to herself, some endings are just the first quiet drafts of beginnings. As the sun rose higher, I realized he had wealth, but I had something rare. I had peace, and no one can ever buy that. Later that afternoon, she sat at her desk again, not working this time, just thinking. In front of her was a white envelope, plain and neat, addressed to a name she hadn't spoken aloud in over a year. Inside was a check, the last debt from the life they once shared. Not out of guilt, not out of memory, just to balance the scales. Her signature at the bottom felt like a seal, not of repayment, but of release. She slipped the envelope into her bag and walked down to the old mailbox on the corner, the same one she used to walk past on her way to his apartment. The air was calm, touched with sunlight, and the faint scent of rain. She opened the slot, hesitated for a second, not because she doubted it, but because she wanted to remember the moment completely. The weight of the paper in her hand, the echo of everything she'd been through, the woman she was before and the one she'd become. Then she dropped it in. The soft sound it made, thud, was quieter than expected, but somehow it felt like thunder in her chest. She exhaled slowly, smiling. No anger, no regret, just stillness. Walking back, she passed her reflection in a shop window. For the first time, she didn't flinch. She didn't compare, didn't remember, didn't ache. She just smiled at her reflection, at her clarity. I used to chase closure like it was something he owed me. But peace isn't something you're given. It's something you decide to keep. On her desk, by the same window where Maya had sat thinking about cash, she placed her coffee cup beside the sunlit table. The light hit the brass plaque again, the name gleaming brighter than ever. She whispered softly, "He built an empire on deceit. I built a legacy on the ruins." And with that, she closed the window, not to shut the world out, but to mark that chapter was at last complete. They say success is what you build for yourself, but legacy, that's what you leave behind for others to build upon. The room buzzed with a gentle hum of curiosity, pencils scratching, quiet laughter, the shuffle of chairs as a group of young designers gathered in front of her. Maya stood near the window, the skyline stretching endlessly behind her, Towers she had once only dreamed of designing now stood like her silent witnesses. The brass plaque bearing her company's name hung on the wall above her, catching the light. She smiled at the faces before her, fresh, hopeful, untamed by heartbreak or failure yet. She saw pieces of her younger self in each one of them. "Before we start," she said, her voice calm but commanding, "I want you all to remember one thing. Never build your life in someone else's blueprint." A murmur spread through the room. A few smiled, others nodded thoughtfully. Maya placed her hands on the table and continued, "Because when you design according to someone else's dream, you lose sight of your own lines. And when they leave, you're left standing in their frame, not yours." She paused, letting that settle. One student, a girl with wide eyes and ink-stained fingers, raised her hand. "Did you ever lose your lines?" She chuckled softly and said, "I didn't lose them. I just forgot I could draw without permission." The class laughed, but her eyes softened as she looked out the window. "The truth is," she continued, "I learned the hard way that even broken foundations can be rebuilt. You just have to decide that you're worth the work." She moved toward the whiteboard and began sketching not a building, but a spiral, looping outward, wider and wider. "This," she said, tapping the center, "is where pain begins. But as you grow, your circle expands until the pain isn't gone, but it becomes too small to define you anymore." Silence filled the room, the kind that carries understanding. I spent years trying to erase the past. Then I realized it was never meant to be erased. It was meant to be redrawn. After the class ended, one by one, the students left, some thanking her softly, some too shy to speak. When the room was finally empty, Maya stood for a moment in the quiet. On the board, the spiral she'd drawn glowed faintly in the sunlight. On the wall, the plaque shimmered like a heartbeat. She reached into her bag, pulling out the same old sketchbook, its cover worn, its pages heavy with the past. She flipped it open to the first page, the faint pencil lines of a design she'd drawn years ago. Underneath, in small writing, were the words she'd once scribbled in doubt. "I hope I'm enough." She smiled. Then, with steady hands, she wrote just beneath it, "I made it. Fully, unapologetically, and entirely on my own terms." Closing the book, she looked once more at the skyline, her legacy rising quietly in the distance. They said he built an empire. Maybe he did, but I built something rarer. I built meaning.